I'm Naya, mom, boob nerd, board-certified lactation consultant, and lover of lipstick and curse words. I'm that weird Indian girl you knew in high school, all grown up.
And I'm Alexis, mom, birth nerd, and therapist plus doula, encouraging parents to hold joy plus what the fuck is this mess simultaneously. Some people think I'm too much, but those aren't my people.
And we are the Top Knot Squad.
TKS is a tiny little podcast about motherhood in real life, the good, the bad, the ugly AF.
Hosted by two women that are passionate about our beliefs and unafraid to speak our minds.
Friends that wanted to create space for all that ish we are too scared to talk about.
Are you ready to laugh, be vulnerable, and keep it real with us?
Top knots are not required.
If the Top Knot Squad content makes you laugh, nod in agreement, or makes you feel less alone, we'd love your support in the cost of producing this podcast. Visit patreon.com/TopKnotSquad to learn more about our budget-friendly sponsorship tiers and how you can help ensure that TKS has a future. Every little bit helps. Trigger warning. On this episode, TKS discusses the heavy topic of grief, including things we often overlook in our day-to-day lives and approaching the topic with your children. This topic can be difficult, so please be kind to yourself and take the space you need. As mothers, we want to do everything we can to protect our little ones from things that hurt, both physically and emotionally. While we do a pretty good job, there are life events that rock our world. One of those life events is death. Whether it's the passing of a beloved pet, friend, or family member, trying to speak to children about it seems unthinkable. In addition to speaking to our children about it, we also need to think about life beyond loss. Having this conversation with your spouse, partner, and other family members can be difficult. It's definitely one that no one wants to think about, let alone discuss in detail. Today, we are lucky to have Cheyenne Bell in the studio to help us navigate this often avoided topic with compassion and tenderness. Cheyenne Bell is a young widow, a mama to two littles, an attorney, writer, speaker, and blogger at Sense and Serendipity, a website focused on inspiring others to create a home well-loved and a life well-lived. A lover of home decor, vintage finds, yoga, coffee, red wine, and sarcasm, Cheyenne lives in the Austin area with her two sweet kiddos and pretty much fits in with the Top Knot Squad. You can find her at senseandserendipityblog.com or on Facebook and Instagram at Sense and Serendipity Blog.
Yay.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So, can you start by sharing with our listeners a little bit about your story, whatever you're comfortable sharing?
Sure, of course. So Gary and I married in 2010, and we started a happy little life with a happy little family, and everything was going well. We had just moved into a new home in Katy, Texas, the summer of 2017, and we were settling in and just kind of getting to know our community, kind of getting, putting some roots down. And one day in October, it was October 25th, 2017, I woke up in the middle of the night. I heard some very strange sounds coming from his side of the bed. And I turned and looked at him, and I thought he was having a seizure. And I couldn't wrap my mind around how it was possible that my healthy, strong, young husband was having a seizure, especially with no history of any medical conditions whatsoever. Mm-hmm. And so it took me a minute to respond. I kept saying, "Are you okay? Are you okay?" and trying to shake him out of it, and nothing was working. And finally, I started to get very scared, so I called 911 and tried to describe what was happening. And in the middle of that, I realized that I was probably going to the hospital, and I needed to figure out what to do with my kids because they were upstairs sleeping. I couldn't just leave them, and we didn't have any family in the area. Everybody was 3 hours away. So I ran. I left him laying there, and I ran to my neighbor and pounded on their door until they came to the door and just motioned for them to come. And they did. And by the time we got back into my bedroom, Gary was not breathing and his lips were turning blue. And so my neighbor helped me to get him on the floor, and I tried to do CPR. It was hard to do CPR because I didn't know what I was doing, and I felt like I was breaking him. I could literally feel his ribs breaking, and so I kept pulling back because I didn't want to hurt him. But I had to keep doing something, and so I kept trying. And finally, the ambulance, the EMTs arrived, and they took over for me. and continued to try to resuscitate him, but he was not responding. We eventually got him and I to the hospital, and I think I knew deep down inside that he was not going to come back, but I kept begging and praying and pleading and, all the things that you do in the midst of tragedy is what I was doing. And but in the ER, they kept trying. They did everything they could, and they couldn't bring him back. And so they finally stopped and told me that they had done all they could. And so I had to make all the phone calls to all the family and let them know what had happened. And then I sat with him for 5 hours until the ME came. And in that time between him dying and then the day or two it took for the ME report to come back, I blamed myself for not acting fast enough. All the things that you do when you feel like, if only I had done something, if only I had known CPR, if only. And also not understanding how in the world this was possible because nobody knew what had happened yet. Mm-hmm. It turns out that he had a genetic heart condition. Basically, he had severe coronary artery disease, and nobody knew it. And there was also evidence that he had a previous heart attack.
Oh, wow.
And nobody knew it.
Mm-hmm.
And he does have a history of heart disease in his family, but it wasn't necessarily discussed to an extent that he would know to tell his doctor during a physical.
Right.
So he was never tested. And he did have tests like an EKG and all kinds of normal tests that you would have done if you're having a physical exam, which he did frequently for his job. But those don't catch the coronary artery disease because they don't show the calcium buildup in the arteries. The only thing that would have shown it is a calcium test, basically. And doctors don't order that unless there is a history of heart disease. And so he didn't know. Nobody knew to ask for that. So he basically had a massive heart attack. He was 36 years old. And it took him very quickly. And so for that, I am grateful. But it was... It's an understatement to say that it was the most shocking and horrible thing that I've experienced in my life so far. And then second to that is coming home to tell my 4 and 2-year-old that their daddy wasn't coming back. So that started this journey of widowhood that I am now finding myself on.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for sharing that. I know that that's not easy, and this is, of all the spaces to share, I really appreciate you being willing to share that with our listeners, because I don't think that this topic is often covered.
Mm-hmm. But it seems to be happening a lot.
Yeah. It's actually incredible that within 6 months of Gary dying, 2 more women that I knew lost their husbands at around the same ages. And it's like... nobody expects it, and nobody talks about it, and nobody prepares for it. And so it just blindsides you when it happens. Mm-hmm. And I was shocked to find out once I became a young widow that there are far more young widows out there than you think. Mm-hmm. It's like a hidden demographic. Mm-hmm. And once I became one, I made it my mission to be a voice for them, because this is not an easy road, and you do not need to feel alone when you're going through something like this. You need your tribe.
And I know for a fact this is going to resonate for someone that's listening. So your voice is going to be heard. You look like you're about to say something.
No, I was going to ask kind of probably the hardest question that we're going to ask you is how do you tell your children something like that? Just how do you do it? There's no coming back from that. I know we have a mutual friend who also lost her husband very suddenly in a tragic way. And one thing she posted on Facebook, and she shared it, was a photo. She took a picture with her daughters before she told them. And she wanted to do that because she was like, this is the last moment of innocence for them. And their whole world turned upside down. Yeah. And thinking about that, it breaks my heart.
Yes.
But how? That's really all I have to say about that.
I honestly didn't have a plan. I just knew I've always treated my children as tiny adults. I don't I don't coddle. I don't sugarcoat. I deliver truth as gently as I can because I just don't think it serves them any good to sugarcoat things for them. Life is hard, and I'm going to be there for them to make it as easy as possible to navigate, but it will do a disservice to them if I don't feed them truth. So when I came home from the hospital, I got a couple of hours of very bad sleep because I was up all night. And then at around 6 o'clock, as is toddlers are wont to do, they came tumbling down the stairs, and they were very surprised to see their grandparents who had come in overnight, Gary's parents. And they were very surprised and excited. And I knew I just needed to first tell Aislinn, my oldest daughter, or my oldest child. At the time, she was only 4, but she was Daddy's little girl, and they were 2 peas in a pod, and she is his little clone. And I knew that it would be hardest to tell her. So I took her aside, and I took her on my lap and sat on the couch, and I told her that her daddy had gone to heaven, and he was going to live with Jesus because those are our beliefs. And so I told her that he was not going to come back, but that he was always watching her and always watching over her and loved her, and his love would never go away, and that he would be watching her all of her life, and that it was okay to be sad. And then she just fell apart. And I think that may have been a harder moment for me than watching Gary die, because I knew he was okay. I knew where he went. I didn't worry about him. I worried about us.
Right.
And specifically, I worried about my kids. Like, you can pile the crap on me all day, every day, but don't fucking mess with my kids. And that's, I can't fix that. I can't fix that. So that was the hardest thing, is that I couldn't fix it. All I could do was tell her what had happened and just be there to carry her grief and to help her navigate through that grief. And and then when I went and told Hawkins, my son, he was 2, he didn't have the capacity to understand. But I didn't want to not tell him. I mean, he knew that Daddy wasn't around. I mean, he could clearly see that. So I explained to him the same way I told Aislinn, and he said, okay, can I go play with my trains? And I said, okay, yeah, buddy, you can go play with your trains. And that was a surprise to me, the way he responded, because I guess I didn't expect much different, but it made me realize in that instant that this was not going to be something that he could process for a really long time. So I needed to just be watchful for when he did start to process it. And so I guess my focus mainly went to Aislinn and helping her through it, and just keeping an eye on him.
What supports did you guys engage in that were helpful as you navigated that?
I'm very blessed to have a very supportive, loving family. Everyone came. They surrounded us. They were there within hours, and they just took over. And I am not the kind of person to let anybody have control, especially of my household. And so I thought that it would bother me to have so many people in my house and taking over and doing all these things for me, but I didn't have the capacity to function as a normal human being in those first several weeks. And so I gladly relinquished control and just let people love me, because that's what I needed. And so I had family, I had friends, I had Gary was so well loved. There was over 450 people at his memorial service. Wow. And I can't tell you how many people were in and out of my house in those first few weeks, just making sure that the kids and I were doing okay, or as okay as we could do in that moment. But even now, I get people reaching out to me saying, hey, do you need anything? How are you doing? How are the kids? And I've always tried to include those people in this process of us carrying on, because I want them to see that we are okay, that we will be okay, and that they've helped to make that so. But yeah, I was lucky to have a lot of familial and friend support.
I know that you mentioned your faith specifically, and I know that just because we're Facebook friends and because we're friends, I see it, that you rely on your faith a lot. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
I cannot sit here and tell you that it has been easy to trust God after something like that happens. And I always find it interesting how tragedies like this, whether it's a massive breakup or a loss of a child or a loss of a spouse, or even just maybe a loss of a job that you really liked, anything that triggers grief in you will kind of shake your foundations and make you question what you believe. And I grew up in a very faith-filled household. I won't call it religious because I kind of hate that term, but it was very faith-filled, and I was lucky to have that foundation. But I rebelled a lot against my faith in college and kind of off and on through my younger years, because I wasn't sure if I could trust somebody that I couldn't see or feel, or, I didn't hear audibly, all of these things. And through the years, I just kept feeling pulled back toward God, even in my rebellion, and even when I just kind of tried to shut that down in my life, I kept being pulled back. And so I basically said, okay, God, I will trust you. And Gary and I had basically started going to church and trying to make our faith a more, a more regular part of our family. We didn't want to just be, the Christmas Christians. We wanted it to be a little bit more substantial, especially for our kids. But we discussed faith a lot. He had an aunt who had cerebral palsy all of her life, and he was very angry at God for a long time. Like, how could God let that happen to such a wonderful person? She's stuck in her body and all of these things. But she was more faith-filled than anybody had ever met. I mean, God was her homie, man. I mean, like, that woman, she was a wonderful, wonderful woman. And he kind of saw that eventually, that she was like, this is my life, and I am happy in my life. And I think that God got it right, and I'm okay with this is how it is. And he saw that in her. And he really we both really started to just grow closer in our own faith walk. And neither of us had the same faith walk. And I think that's really important for couples to understand, is you and your husband do not have to be on the same path, in the same place in your path, on your journey. You guys have to do an individual faith walk and just support each other in that. But we were trying to do that. And so, yeah, when he died, it was almost it was not my choice. I literally, when he died and his parents came and we were standing there over his body, and I just kept laying my head on his body. The ME came and was about to take him. And so I just laid my hands on him, and I started praying and praising God for this wonderful man who I had been blessed with for nearly 10 years. And I just thanked him that we knew exactly where he was, that he was no longer in pain. I thanked him for the impact he had on my life and all of the lives that he touched, which were very, very many in his short time here. I thanked him for the beautiful children that he had allowed us to have, that Gary's legacy would live on in those kids. And I just praised him. And it was not coming from me, because I didn't want to praise him, but it happened, and it gave me peace. And I knew in that moment that we were going to be okay, and that if nothing else, relying on God was the right choice because of the peace that I felt in that moment. He basically gave me a choice. He said, you can either lean into me or you can fight this in your own strength. Mm-hmm. And I have fought a lot of things in my own strength before, and I have always failed that fight. It has always ended badly for me when I try to fight things in my own strength. And so I chose to lean into him. And I cannot tell you that it has been easy, and I cannot tell you that I have not questioned my sanity at times. But he has been faithful. He has provided in subtle ways and in very obvious ways. He has provided for us every step of the way, and I trust that he will continue providing for us.
You've mentioned a few things that were helpful for you as you were navigating your grief. Mm-hmm. So the familial support,
right,
kind of surrendering control and accepting help from people, mm-hmm. Your faith. Was there anything during your journey that wasn't helpful that you would want people to know is not really what someone who's in a grieving space needs?
Oh, goodness. Unsolicited advice. You know, the cliches that you want to say to somebody because you don't know what else to say, like, oh, he's in a better place, or everything happens for a reason, or, you know, you're young, you'll find love again. It's like, mm-hmm. oh, fuck off. Mm-hmm. You know, like, mm-hmm. please don't tell me how to grieve. Don't tell me how everything's going to be. Unless you are walking in my shoes, you have absolutely no call to tell me these things, because it's not helpful. Mm-hmm. The thing that if you don't know what to say to a grieving person, just give them a hug. Just say, what can I do for you in this moment? Just say, can I pray for you? Or can I bring you a meal? Provide some sort of offer something. Right. Don't ask a question, because honestly, we don't know how we're doing from minute to minute. I can go from being in a puddle on my floor to being, you know, functioning as a normal human being within 15 minutes. It just, grief hits you in waves, and you just have to ride them out. And so if you want to be helpful, offer some actual form of help, even if it's as simple as, I have a friend, her name is Jen. She sends me cards out of the blue, just handwritten, thinking about you. You're rocking this. I love you. You know, and I'm just like, that's and they always come exactly when I need to pick me up. Right. And it's incredible. It's a gift. And if that's all you can do is send somebody a card just out of the blue, I cannot tell you how much that helps. Mm-hmm.
We talked about this a little bit. We had an episode in our first season around perinatal loss. And some of what you're speaking to reminds me, we talked a little bit about Brené Brown. I don't know if you're familiar with her, but she talks about the difference between sympathy versus empathy. Yeah. And there's this video of, you know, your friends like in a hole, and sympathy is you just kind of look down the hole like, ooh, that
sucks, man.
That looks hard. Do you like, good luck down there.
Have a good time.
You get out.
Whereas empathy is you climb down into the hole, and even if you don't, holding space, like simply holding space. Like you may not know what to say, and you may be afraid of saying the wrong thing, and even that's better to say. Like, I don't know if I'm going to say the right thing, but I want to be here with you.
Yes, and honestly, one of the things that irritates me the most are when people are afraid to talk about Gary or say his name. Please don't. I loved him. I will always love him. And I get excited talking about him because he was an amazing man and he was an amazing father, and his kids need to know him. And the only way they're going to know him now is through our memories, through our conversations about him and remembering him with video and picture and all of these things. Don't be afraid to speak their name. Don't be afraid, because you only lose a person truly when you stop speaking their name, when you stop remembering them. So yes, continue to talk about that. Even if it makes you feel a little uncomfortable, just keep saying, hey, I thought about your late spouse the other day. I really miss that guy, whatever. Just acknowledge that he existed, that he was loved, and that you understand that that person will always grieve that loss. And it's okay to always grieve that loss.
Yeah, the grief, it doesn't go, like, it doesn't end. No. Like, this is a lifelong journey for you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One thing I also wanted to talk about a little bit is kind of preparing for loss and for the inevitable loss of somebody important in our life, namely our partner or spouse. Can you talk a little bit about how his death has sort of impacted your mission and your career and what you're doing now?
Yeah. So I am an attorney, but I stopped practicing when we started having kids, and I was very content to just be a stay-at-home mom until they were in school.
With a badass sense for interior design, might I add.
Thanks. Yeah, that was my side gig. And so I was perfectly fine never practicing again. But when he died, and I started rummaging through all of our crap looking for his will, because I remember having written the wills, but something in the back of my head was telling me that we didn't finish it. And I was really nervous about that. And eventually I did find our wills, and sure enough, we did not have them executed. So he essentially died without a will because there was nothing that I could prove in court, basically. And so that was pretty devastating to realize that I had failed as an attorney for my own spouse. But, we were really young and in the prime of our lives and healthy, and we had time. And that's what all young people think, is that they have time. But what I've learned through this is that we don't. Tomorrow is not guaranteed. You could get hit by a bus tomorrow. You could get cancer and it takes you quickly. I mean, there are so many ways that life can just fuck you. And it happens a lot. Yeah. And so you really need to be prepared. And so after a while, I think it was around probably 9 months or so, it had kind of been in the back of my mind that maybe I had gone to law school for exactly this reason, because I hated every other area that I have practiced. And I didn't know why I would be led to law school if I was just going to be miserable and get into a lot of debt for this degree that I'm never going to use. Right. And it just kind of occurred to me that maybe this is exactly why, because I need to help other women, other people prepare for something that is inevitably going to happen. And I hope for not a very, very long time in their lives, but it does happen. And so I decided to open a practice writing wills part-time from my house, because I still have little kids at home who aren't in school. So I still have to, being a mom is my main priority. But yeah, so preparing a will, the two main things that you can do to prepare basically you're protecting your family by doing these two things. And that is getting your will done and investing in life insurance. And those things seem scary and kind of depressing and really daunting, but they're really, really not. I mean, they are pretty simple. And the way that I handle writing wills is I try and make it a celebration of adulting, basically, instead of a morose, oh my God, we have to talk about death. It's not an unpleasant topic if you just look at it as a task that you need to do to protect your family. And afterwards we can crack a bottle of wine and celebrate and toast to being adults, because sometimes adulting sucks and we need to celebrate it when we do it right.
Exactly. But we have to do it anyway.
Yeah. So that's kind of my spiel for I have will parties, basically. I get them written.
Love that.
I get them written. I come over to your house. We sit down. We have the signing, and then we have a glass of wine, and everything is happy, and nobody has to cry about anything, and it's great. But yeah, getting your wills done and then investing in life insurance, which is actually super affordable. I mean, that was one of the very first things that I did after I kind of got my head back on my shoulders a little bit and I could think clearly, is I wrote my will, and then I invited some of my best friends over, and I took them to brunch, and I called a notary and I said, I'm going to take everybody to brunch. We're going to sign my will. She's like, oh, that's an odd thing to do at brunch, but all right. So we did that and we had a great time. And then I bought some life insurance for myself, and I had so much peace just doing those two things, knowing that no matter what, if anything were to happen to me, my kids were taken care of. Even if they're adults, that policy will provide for them. And the trust that I set up in my will provide for them. So I felt a lot of peace doing that. And so now it's become one of my missions to educate, especially young people, about the importance of wills and getting basically your financial and personal ducks in a row so that you can have peace of mind and so that your family is protected should the worst happen.
Oh, we don't have any of those things.
Yeah.
I'll be calling you.
We have started it, but we never finished, and it's definitely not executed. So we need to move forward and do that finance.
Yeah. Well, I have two questions. So one is, my husband does have like a life insurance, or I don't know if that's what it's called, but through his employer.
Yes.
But it's not, I'm imagining that it's probably not enough.
Okay.
How do you determine what is enough?
Certainly something that you guys need to sit down and talk about. Just be really open and honest. Say, let's look at the paperwork. How much do you have in coverage? What is the premium that we're paying? Because there probably is a policy out there that's better. And so you should do some shopping. Just kind of look around. Financial planners are a really good resource for finding good term life. There's also life insurance agents that know the ins and outs of these policies. You could utilize one of them. But yeah, just look at the terms. And for me, because budget was an issue, because we once again failed to adult and nothing was left to me. So I don't have much money to spend. And so the first policy that I bought was about $25 a month. And it covered, I think, $150,000. And so I knew that wasn't obviously enough for my kids to live on, but it would cover any like burial expenses or medical expenses or anything like that, so they wouldn't have to worry about that. And for me, that was enough, because I also know that my kids, the people that I have designated as their guardians in the will, they will take care of my kids. And so I wasn't overly concerned about providing a bunch of money for them. Now, I did hook up with a financial planner who is amazing, and she's been helping me to make sure that I'm getting the best policy for my budget. And she actually found one that was better for $20 a month with $300,000 coverage.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
What a difference.
I know. And so I snapped that up real quick. And so that's even better. So there are options out there, and there are all kinds of policies out there. So do some research and, get an insurance, life insurance agent to kind of look at it with you and shop the policies for you.
Yeah, my other question, which is kind of related to that, is we have talked about making a will, but we can't agree on who the guardians of our children would be.
That is the hardest thing for most people.
Yeah. So do you have any tips around that? Or,
sometimes you guys just have to agree that, because honestly, it's the last person standing wins. So you write your wills individually. It's you never, ever, ever want to write a joint will.
Oh.
See, I didn't know that.
Oh, yes.
Okay.
You each have individual wills because you are an individual person. You don't give up your autonomy just because you've gotten married.
So you're saying, like, I have a will and I would put the guardians that I would want, and he would put the guardians that he wants.
Yes.
So there's no way to put like a joint.
Yeah, you can agree, absolutely. But it's never a good idea to write a will together, because if one of you dies, then you're going to have to rewrite a will anyway, because it doesn't apply anymore. And also it can be very confusing when it goes to probate. So the best thing to do is to write individual wills. And then if it were me and my spouse sitting down, I would just talk about it and say, okay, look, this is who I want, and I know this is who you want. And honestly, if I die first, then your will is going to win anyway. And so you just have to be okay knowing that he's, in his best judgment, doing what he thinks is right for his children, even if it's not somebody that you would have picked. You have to trust your spouse to make the best choice that they can make, even if it's not the same person that you would choose. A lot of spouses will do, basically, they will pick one person or a couple and then list alternates that are different. So you always want to list an alternate guardian, just in case the person that you picked doesn't survive you. And so you could say, I want Jane and John Doe, and he says, I want Jane and John Doe. And then the alternates are like, but if Jane and John Doe don't survive, then I want Bob Smith. And he says, if Jane and John Doe don't survive, I want Jane Smith or whomever, whatever. It can be separate that way. So you each, if you can agree on one person or couple for the main and then each do alternates, maybe that's a compromise you can make. But truly, it's the last will standing who wins. And, hopefully you'll never have to encounter that. Hopefully y'all will live to a ripe old age and your children will be adults by the time you pass. So guardian won't even be a question. But in the circumstance where you can't agree, you have to either try to come to an agreement or agree that whomever they put in that will, it's their choice on their best judgment, and I'm going to trust you with that because you're going to be gone. And it's going to be up to him anyway.
That makes sense.
So I know we talked a little bit about guardianship. What else can wills cover, and what else should they cover?
The two main things is that it directs what you want to happen with your property and your assets, and it directs who you want to care for your children and how that is to be either who you want to, both who you want to care and how the money in the trust or the assets in the trust is to be distributed to your children and at what ages and stuff like that. So for your assets, you would basically, obviously you can't take it with you, but you can control what happens to it, which is the benefit of having a will. So you could do anything you want with it. You can leave it to a charity. You can leave it to your children outright, which is never a good idea, but you can do that. You can put it all in a trust for your children to be distributed, which is what I highly suggest, especially if your children are minors.
Wait, why is it not a good idea to leave it to your children outright?
If you don't put it in a trust and your kids are minors when you pass, they are not legally allowed to own property. So it would be a court-appointed trust, and then you get no control over the terms. So
that makes sense.
What you want to do is create a trust within your will. It's called a testamentary trust, and you will basically delineate exactly what you want to happen. I want all my assets to go into this trust for the benefit of my children, and I want it to be distributed to them at 21 years of age. Or you can even say, I had a client who did this, a third at 21, a third at 25, and the remainder at 30, but only if they have a 4-year degree from an accredited university.
That's funny.
And controlling your kids from the grave.
Exactly. Who doesn't want that?
Right?
And I thought that was brilliant because it really, it gave her peace of mind, and it encouraged the values that she has for her children. It encouraged them even if she weren't around.
Right.
So
that makes sense.
You made me think of another question. Can you, I don't know, is it allowed if you're like setting a guardian up to say like where they have to live with your children? Like how does that work?
Let's see.
Is that a weird,
very
is that a weird
specific
question?
plans, I think.
Yeah.
Well, like our families live in two very different areas, and we live here in Austin, and I'm just like, I don't know if I want my kids raised in this area versus that area. Like, you know,
right.
But at the same time, that seems really difficult to request that.
I think it is. And I honestly don't know the answer to that, but that's a great question. And I will certainly research that for you. But my instinct is that, I mean, you can ask for whatever you want in the will. That doesn't mean that the court can enforce it if it's not feasible. Like if it's in the kid's best interest.
Realistic request.
Right. If it's in the kid's best interest to go to the guardians that you've chosen, but they refuse to live in Austin because it doesn't make sense for them, you know, do you really want to limit who raises your kids by where they're raised? Because honestly, if they're raised by good people, it doesn't matter where they're being raised.
Right.
You're right.
And so just kind of a follow-up to that, do you have any tips on how families can kind of start this conversation?
Oh, yeah. Goodness. It's never an easy topic to discuss, but you have to be blunt. I would suggest having the kids in bed, obviously, because nobody can think when they're awake.
No.
So maybe just kind of bring it up to your spouse gently and say, hey, look, there's something that I think we need to discuss about, making our wills, maybe looking into life insurance. I know it's not a comfortable topic, but I'd really like to set a date. Can we have a date tonight? Mm-hmm. And let's have some wine and kind of just start talking about it and see how we feel about this, because it's something that's been on my mind and on my heart. And I really want to discuss it with you. And I know that there are a lot of spouses who kind of balk at the idea. I had one client who said, I really had to take the reins on this because he did not want to discuss it. And so I basically just said, I'm getting this done. So if you don't want to talk about it, then I'm going to be the one to write your will.
Right.
And you can sign off on it, but you can review it. But, and he finally was like, okay, I know this needs to be done. Let's just do it and get it over with. So it is a hard topic to discuss, but if you come at it with truth and grace and, try and do it in a non-threatening, relaxed atmosphere, like over a glass of wine, maybe go out for dinner. Okay. Go to a quiet restaurant. Go to a coffee shop. Like, make it a date. Mm-hmm. Make it a time where you guys can be together. Because Lord knows, with kids, you don't get many dates anymore.
No.
So you may as well kill two birds with one stone. Go have a date. Go talk about wills. Come home. I mean, it shouldn't be a hard thing. Although I know it is. But if you make it as if you put your spouse at ease from the beginning, it's an easier topic to discuss.
Another random question just popped in my head. If you have life insurance, do you have to have a will? Like, do you have to have both? So if you have life insurance, do you still for sure get that?
Yeah, you can have life insurance without having a will. And with life insurance policies or death and dismemberment policies, any of those kinds of policies, you designate a beneficiary within that policy. Mm-hmm. So that's a really important thing to remember, is that just because you have a will does not mean that it controls all of your assets. Mm-hmm. You have to make sure that you have designated your beneficiaries correctly in those policies. What I like to suggest people do is to name their trust as a beneficiary of their life insurance policy, so that all of your assets are controlled by the terms of your will. Otherwise, it's going to be controlled by its own guidelines and its own terms. Yeah. And a lot of times what happens is that those terms are just completely basic, and so they release the funds at 18, and no 18-year-old child needs to have their hands on $100,000.
Yeah.
Right. So it would be far better to name your trust, your testamentary trust, or if you created a different trust that's not in your will, but it's a separate trust, whatever you want, name your trust as the beneficiary so it goes through the terms of your will.
I'm glad I asked that question.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good question.
I think we're running out of time.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think so.
Do you have any resources that you'd like to share? We can also put them in our show notes and link to them. Or if there's any that you want to share later, we can add them as well.
The grief centers in Austin and New Braunfels. I can't remember the Hope Hospice in New Braunfels offers free grief counseling for people who have lost a loved one. That was invaluable to me when I moved here. And then also there's one in Austin. I think
it's the Austin Grief and Loss Center. I think
they also offer free counseling services, I believe. There are other organizations that offer discounted rates or even free. I just don't know who they are. But if you just start asking around to maybe therapists in the area, I'm sure that they can point you in a good direction for that. And then if you're looking for an attorney to do your will, you can if you're in Texas, you can call the Texas State Bar, ask them for referrals for estate planning attorneys, and they can give you a list of people who can start planning your will for you.
Awesome.
That's good to know.
Yeah.
Like I said, we have one. We just need to execute it, which again is that big important step.
Yeah.
And something always comes up, but you're right. We'll make a date night out of it or a date afternoon out of it and just do it.
And it's not a one and done. You have to kind of keep it in the forefront of your mind as life events happen. So like if you get a divorce or if you have another baby or something.
I didn't think about having another baby.
You want to make sure that you include and it doesn't necessarily mean that your additional child, your oops baby or your surprise baby is going to be excluded, because there are terms in well-written wills that will include those children that come after. But it's always good to review your will after every kind of big life event so that you make sure that you're still comfortable with what's going on there. Because what you don't want to happen is you just write it and then 20 years later something happens, you're like, oh crap, I don't want those people to be the guardian of my children anymore.
Yeah.
You know?
That's really good advice, especially for people who already have a will and are like, yeah, I'm good. I don't need to think about this again.
Right. Or if you inherit a lot of money when your parents die or something like that, and all of a sudden you have to worry about estate taxes.
Yes.
You don't want your estate to be depleted from taxes because you had a poorly written will.
Right.
So.
Yeah.
Whew.
Heavy stuff, but necessary stuff.
Yeah.
No,
it's important.
no, I'm so thankful. You've lit a fire. So, because we've needed to do this for a long time.
But is there anything else that you'd like to say or anything you'd like to leave our listeners with, whether it's pertaining to grief or wills or anything?
The only thing as it pertains to grief, I just want the listeners to know that you are not alone, that there are people out there walking this journey or who have gone before. Seek out those people, gain strength and wisdom from them, and just do the next right thing. Just put one foot in front of the other and just do the next right thing.
That's beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here and for sharing your story.
Sure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
If the Top Knot Squad's content makes you laugh, nod in agreement, or makes you feel less alone, we'd love your support in the cost of producing this podcast. Visit patreon.com/TopKnotSquad to learn more about our budget-friendly sponsorship tiers and how you can help ensure that TKS has a future. Every little bit helps.
If you like what you hear, then be sure to click the subscribe button in your podcast app. While you're there, leave us a review. You can find us on social media. Just search for Top Knot Squad. We welcome your feedback and love making new friends.